Hey, I got a question. What's the most important resource in Magic the Gathering? Is it the cards that you have in your hand, or is it the spells you play? No. It's none of those things. It's this thing. It is this thing right here. This, and this, and this. These are the things that allow you to play cards in this game. If you don't have these, you can't do anything. So what if I told you there's a lovely commander that I have not seen played enough that lets you abuse the hell out of these things? Well, it's this guy right here, and this is another $15 budget build. This deck will cost you $15.60 total. The commander is 74 cents. You are going to have a blast with this deck. And I want to emphasize the word blast because some of the ways we have to end the game in this are quite explosive. So if you want to hear about the Soul of Windgrace, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. So let's go ahead and quickly mention that this is a land deck. So we're going to start out with our lands before we do anything else. This deck has no less than 10 fetching lands. Now, these are not fetch lands, because one fetch land would break the entire budget of this, but these are lands that can fetch other lands out of our deck, but more importantly, they get to land themselves in the graveyard because of what our commander does. Now, why does that matter? Well, the Soul of Windgrace says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, put a land from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped and under your control. That's right, he ramps you when he comes onto the board, meaning that even if he dies, he's just going to pay for himself the turn after. You will never have trouble recasting this commander if you play your cards right, literally. So, what does he do aside from that? Because he's got a bunch of other text. Well, he costs you 4 mana for a 5/4. That's already a pretty good rate of return. You can pay a green, discard a card, and gain 3 life. That's okay. He lets you pay a red and 1 colorless to discard a land and draw a card. That's also pretty okay. That's looting. That lets us get through our deck. More importantly, that guarantees lands will be in the graveyard for his effect if we haven't used fetching lands. But he also has a final ability. Discard a land card. He gains indestructible, and then you can tap him. This means we get to do things like wipe the board clean while just keeping our commander out and then gaining more and more mana. So, what is the goal here? We want to do one of 2 things. We want to make the Soul of Windgrace and our deck synergies give us a ton of lands, and then we want those lands to pay us off in tokens. We want those lands to pay us off in damage to the opponent. We want those lands to pay us off in raw, hard-running, powerful creatures. And Soul of Windgrace is going to get us there in every way, shape, and form. Let's start off with not the lands, but the ramp package, actually. Elvish Rejuvenator, when it comes onto the board, we get to get a land from the top 5 cards of our deck. Eranis is the second commander of the deck. Whenever it swings, put a land from your graveyard onto the battlefield, and it's got Death Touch, so it's hard for people to deal with it. Scampering Surveyor is Solemn Simulacrum if he costs 6 pennies. When he comes onto the battlefield, grab a basic land from your deck, put it onto the battlefield shuffled. Dawn Treader Elk is a 2-mana creature that you can pay 1, sack it, and get a land from your graveyard, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Wayfarer's Bauble is the same card, but for different mana. 1 mana to play, 2 mana to use its ability. Beanstalk Giant, you can use it to grab any land from your deck, put it onto the battlefield as long as the land's basic, and then its power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control if you cast it for its right side instead of its adventure side. Fonda Fertility is the same as Wayfarer's Bauble. Sack it, get a land from your deck, put it onto the battlefield. Farhaven Elf touches the board, becomes a 1/1 body, gets a land from your deck, puts it onto the battlefield tapped. Kalani Heart Expedition is interesting for us. It doesn't get us a land immediately, but every time we play a land, this allows us to put a quest counter on the expedition. And then, once it has 3 counters, we can crack it, get 2 lands from our deck, put them onto the battlefield tapped. 2 mana for a bunch of lands in a Landfall deck is a pretty good rate of return, not even gonna lie. Then we have Growth Spasm, search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then also make an Eldrazi spawn that can sack 4 colorless mana. This is double mana acceleration. Search for Tomorrow, we can cast on turn 1 for the suspend cost, or we can cast it for 3 to get any land from our battlefield onto, or land from the deck onto the battlefield. Having trouble with this. Roiling Regrowth helps us a ton too. Sack a land, putting it in the graveyard for the Soul of Windgrace to grab. Grab 2 lands that are basic from your deck, put them into the battlefield. Spring Bloom Druid is the same way. Sack a land, get 2 lands. Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn both allow you to get a land onto the battlefield tapped, with Edge of Autumn having the added ability to sacrifice a land to use it as a draw spell. So this can actually, in a pinch, force our commander to have the land in graveyard that he wants. Edge of Autumn is a really finicky card in a lot of decks, not really in here. We're getting rid of a lot of our lands. What do we do when we want cards to come back? Well, we got 2 answers for that. One of them is the Perennial Behemoth. We can play lands from our grave while it's out. This is a Crucible of Worlds for pennies. This is an amazing card to put in your landfall decks that are on a budget. And then, of course, Timeless Witness. It is Eternal Witness, but it has the ability to eternalize it so that it comes onto the board as a token with its ability again. This is super important for us because we are going to be getting enough mana to use that eternalize ability, so this will let us make sure that cards that we otherwise would lose because they are big threats, they get to come back. So I mentioned big threats. What kind of big threats are we using? Well, we've got a few of them. One of them is Malimo Maro Sorcerer. This card says that its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands we control, and importantly, it's got trample. It is a 5-penny card that can close out games really, really hard, especially if we give it the Black Blade Reforged. Now, the Black Blade gives a creature 1/1 for every land we control, but it equips for 7. That's a hefty cost, but if we throw it on our commander or on Malimo, not really. Now it suddenly costs 3 mana to do it, and 3 mana to win the game, that's a pretty easy return for me. Crash of the Rhino Beetles is basically a 5-mana 15/15 when we have 10 or more lands with trample. The Centaur Vine Crasher enters the battlefield with 1/1 counters equal to the number of lands that are in all graveyards. Your opponents are using fetch lands. You've got a ton of fetching lands. This is going to get huge. Anytime a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you can pay 2 and then put the Vine Crasher back into your hand. This is going to be popping onto the board over and over and over again, creating problems for people. Nobody wants to deal with a 15/15 trampling green beat stick that gets to come back onto the board basically for free every time you sneeze. Oh, but speaking of sneezing, there's a gust of wind that I absolutely adore in landfall decks. If you've never played Green Fireball in your landfall decks, you are missing out. Hurricane is a silly card. Wizards of the Coast wanted this to be a card that could be used to kill a bunch of flying creatures, and in that ability it does allow us to control dragon decks perfectly fine. That's a cool thing it can do. Here's what else it does. Pay green and pay X, deal X damage to each player and each creature with flying. We get to use this as a single card nuclear option. The game's going south, but we've got like 20 mana because we've been ramping the 1 billion times a turn. We have 1 mana or 1 health higher than everybody else at the table because of the strategy I'll show you guys next. Just play this card. Everybody gets nuked. Nobody lives. Well, except you. Hurricane is a fun way to kill people. Especially since this deck already has red. Your fireball happens to be green, though. But how are we going to make sure that their life totals are lower than ours? Well, we're going to do so with a couple of landfall triggers. This brings us to our burn section. Spitfire Legak. This card says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to every opponent. That's pretty neat. Retreat to Hagra also lets us do the same thing, but we gain a life every time a land comes into play, as well as burning everybody. Between the 2 of these, we can cause a lot of damage and get people down to the point where Hurricane or any of our big tramply creatures can just run them right over. There's another funny card, though. Just a funny ha-ha card we get to play. A card that doubles as a draw spell for us on top of everything else. This is Valakut Exploration. This 74-cent card says when a land enters the battlefield, exile the top of your library. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. This means that when we use our commander to get lands from the graveyard onto the battlefield, this allows us to play lands from exile that it pulls out. And when it pulls big mana cards that we don't want to or can't cast, those don't go to waste like they do with normal Impulse Draw. No, 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 no. On your end step, every single card that was exiled with the Valakut Exploration, goes to your graveyard, where you can now recur it if you need to, and then you get to deal damage to each opponent equal to the mana cost of the card. So let's go ahead and say that you have your Crash of the Rhino Beetles, or your Vine Crasher, or your Mollymo. This means that the Valakut Exploration is burning people for 4, 5, 7 damage on top of whatever damage your Retreat to Hagra or your Spitfire Lagok are doing. This card is not only getting us lands, not only drawing us stuff, this is closing out games for us at a lightning pace for a budget deck. It's kind of insane. So how are we going to get to all of these cards? Well, that's where we have to go to the deck's draw engine. Now, the draw engine for this is a very, very basic one. Most of it is just draw 2, draw 3 stuff. We have a Harmonize to draw 3, Magmatic Insight to throw a land away and draw 2, Read the Bones to scry 2, draw 2, Painful Truth to draw 3, lose 3, Blood Pact to draw 2, lose 2, Greed to filter all of our mana into a ton of draw, Crushing Disappointment, make everybody else burn for 2 and you draw 2, Gruesome Realization, draw 2 and lose 2 life, or make the token player suffer by making all their creatures to have -1/-1. The point of discussion is a draw 2, lose 2, and it makes a blood token we can use to sacrifice lands from our hand into the graveyard. And then Ambition's cost, it's just a draw 3, lose 3. Every single one of these is very, very basic because our commander already has a discard looting effect on it. He already lets us get through our deck fairly easily, and we've got other ways of getting through. So it's a fairly robust draw engine. It doesn't have to be super fancy. It's going to get us there more than anything else. But now you're probably asking yourself, okay, we've already made sure that we've got ways to get to our cards. We've already made sure we've got some big mana payoffs, but what else is the deck doing? You mentioned tokens, and oh boy, did I mention tokens. I made sure that there was plenty of room in this mana base, and this budget, rather, so that we can have Omnath, Locus of Rage. Every time a land enters the battlefield under our control, we make a 5/5 red-green elemental creature token and throw it onto the battlefield, and whenever the Omnath or another elemental dies, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. This doubles as a removal piece and also just another way to close out the game. This makes a ton of tokens. We have also Titania, the Protector of Argoth. This card says that when it enters the battlefield, return a land from our graveyard to the battlefield, and anytime a land is sent into the from the battlefield to the graveyard, make a 5/3 green elemental creature token. And we're going to be sending a lot of lands to the graveyard when we get to that land section. Zendikar's Royal makes 2/2 elementals whenever we play a land. Rampaging Balos makes 4/4 beasts whenever we play a land. Spore Mound makes 1/1 green saplings whenever we play a land. And Phylath makes 0/1 green plants whenever for every land we have when we play it. And every time we play a land, we put 4/1/1 counters on a plant we control. Basically, this is your budget Avenger for Zendikar. He's not doing as much as the Avenger of Zendikar is, but he is still certainly wonderful, and he creates a giant wall to protect you from ongoing threat. But what do we do to make sure that our opponent's strategies are disrupted? It's very important to win games. It's very important to make sure we have big, beefy board states. But what do we do when our opponents are building board states? Well, we got to stop them. And Windgrace happens to have a named card that does that for us. Windgrace's Judgment allows us to blow up any non-land permanent that each other opponent controls. We also have the Meteor Golem, blow up any non-land permanent an opponent controls. A Braid, we can deal 3 damage to a creature or blow up an artifact. Acidic Slime, we can blow up any non-land permanent. Return to Nature, we can hit graveyards, we can blow up artifacts, we can blow up enchantments. Rex Sage blows up artifacts or enchantments. Cankerbloom blows up artifacts or enchantments. Feed the Swarm lets us blow up enchantments or creatures. Putrefy lets us hit artifacts or creatures. And Outland Liberator helps us hit artifacts or enchantments. It also pisses off the entire the entire group, because now we have to make them deal with the night and day mechanic. So just be careful when you're playing this card. your playgroup might not be super happy when they see that it's on the board. But that's not our only way of controlling the table. We also want to have some board wipes available because, well, we can make our commander indestructible, and also it's just kind of important to blow up everybody's stuff when they get ahead of us. We are a landfall deck, so Gaze of Granite works perfectly here. Blow up all non-land permanents that have mana value X or less. We can sink all but a little bit of mana into this, protect our commander, blow up the entire board. If people are building up enchantment strategies, if people are putting planeswalkers out, it doesn't matter. This wipes them out. Lavalanche can wipe creatures out and also burn a player for X damage. We have a ton of lands coming out, so the X is easy to hit again. And then here's a funny one that I found from the most recent Ixalan set. Terror Tide. We can't protect our commander from this, but this is Toxic Deluge on a budget. All creatures get neg X, where X is the number of permanents in your graveyard. Now, I don't know about you, but in a deck throwing its lands to the graveyard all the time, I feel like we're going to be able to play this card pretty easily, because we're mostly blowing up our own lands all of the time. This feels like an easy card to get online and just wipe boards out with. Indestructible be damned, we are just going full on, everybody's getting reset, but we have a ton of lands, so we're actually in a better spot than they are. But speaking of lands, we do need to talk about those lands. We do need to talk about the deck's land strategy. So let's start with our land base here. We have fetching lands, lands that can get us other lands from the deck, and more importantly, exist in the graveyard for our commander to grab. We have Evolving Wilds, grab any basic. Promising Veins can grab any basic. Shire Terrace can grab any basic. Terramorphic Expanse can do the same. Myriad Landscape can grab 2 basics. Blighted Woodland can grab 2 basics. Naya Panorama, Jund Panorama, Grixis Panorama can all grab us some combination of the colored basics in our graveyard by paying 1 and sacking them. And the Riveteer's Outlook gives us 1 life, which is important for the Hurricane I mentioned before, and also automatically sacrifices itself to grab 1 of any of the basics in our deck and puts it onto the battlefield. I also have another type of land to show you. These are basic. They're not basic lands, but most decks should have them. Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. But no, those aren't the ones I want to show you. I want to show you these beauties. The Hidden Volcano, Hidden Nursery, and Hidden Necropolis. Now, these all come into play tapped, but that doesn't matter because our commander is going to be how we're going to be playing these most of the time. We can sacrifice these and discover 4. This is Cascade in our land base, repeatable and recurable because of what our commander is doing. Every single one of these allows us to discover 4 at basically no worry for us. We don't need a ton of draw power in a deck that is just going, hey, whatever I get off the top, I'll just cast it, it's fine. I'll just cast it. It's perfectly fine. I'll get some ramp spells. I'll get some draw spells. Every single one of these draw spells, if you'll note, costs 4 or less. So all of our advantage cards can come off of these hidden lands, and it doesn't hurt us. Also, most of our ramp, damn near all of it, if you don't count the Beanstalk Giant, also comes down for 4 mana or under. These things can accelerate us so fast. And remember, the come into play tapped clause doesn't matter, because what we're going to do with each of these is we are going to have our commander throw one of them into the graveyard to get one of his abilities. Discard a land, draw a card. That just replaces that thing completely for us, and then we get to just swing with the Soul of Windgrace and get one of those lands. They would have come into play tapped anyway because of Windgrace's clause, and we don't care about that. Now when our next turn comes up, if we don't have a play, we're just cracking the land, discovering 4, and then letting Windgrace get us that discover card again and again and again. The discover mechanic's nutty. Having Cascade on anything you so choose is really stupid, but Wizards of the Coast printed it, so we're going to abuse it. So, we want Windgrace to get us lots of lands, We want to put down these big hitting cards here. We want to make sure that our tokens are generated quickly using these lovely cards here. And we want to make certain that our board state is always pushing forward, and we are even fighting from our land base with these stupid cards here. This is one of those decks that I'm going to have a ton of fun bringing to my LGS and just playing the hell out of it with everybody. I'm actually going to order mine right now so that I can stop goldfishing it and actually just bring it to a table and start running people down with an army of lands. I already love Landfall. I have AC built. I have Thalia Gitrog built. This will be my next Landfall deck to play because holy crap, it does so much. And again, this is a $15 deck. It does so many things. It draws tons of cards. It can cascade into cards. It has ways of nuking everybody for X cost damage. It plays big 15/15 trampling creatures. It spawns tons of tokens. There's very little this deck does not do to close out games. So I'm having trouble containing my excitement. Please, if you haven't already, give Soul of Windgrace a try, and if you're willing to do the $15 challenge with me, build this deck out and let me know how your results end up being with it. I think you are going to have an absolute blast with this. You are going to shit out so many lands and spawn a billion tokens and just be the problem of your playgroup. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you have a deck idea that you want me to work on, any commander who's under $1, throw it in the description. I will go ahead and see what is there and what I can build from y'all's ideas. But I've got a ton of other decks to show you, even if we don't. As always, everybody, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.